So welcome to this webinar. My name is Jane Van Sale and I'm the Chief Exec at Working Families. I'm really delighted to welcome you all here to have a look at the future of work in Scotland, the changes and the challenges that there might be. As we move out of tighter restrictions, albeit at slower speeds, and certainly in bits of England, there's now advice not to meet indoors. So I think it's going to be at different speeds, not just across the nations, but also in different areas. We want to use this time to look at what employers have learned over the last just over a year. I'm told it's 14 months. And what we can take forward so we can build more flexible, family-friendly, high-performing teams in workplaces across Scotland. As I mentioned, we have three great speakers. You can see them here, which is great, all with their differing backgrounds. I particularly like the beach. Whether it was cold or warm, it would be so lovely to be walking there. But I did want to start with a couple of reflections from Working Families. As I mentioned, you don't need me to tell you how tough this year has been, not just for people, but also for managers and business leaders and the economy generally. Leaders have been working to support staff who are parents and carers through these unprecedented times. And we know from our research that our employer members, that people leaders have experienced a multitude of challenges around staff engagement, employee well-being, morale, communication, and burnout. So it's really interesting to see that result about the well-being and mental health from the poll. We know also that women have shouldered the biggest burden over the past few months, taking more unpaid leave, and far more are likely to have had to take furlough for caring responsibilities or faced redundancy. Inquiries to our free legal advice service, which increased six-fold at the peak of the lockdown, were overwhelmingly from women, the majority of whom were in low-income jobs. But we also know that some of the mass experience of flexible working has brought big benefits to individuals as well as to employers. And our employer members have reported overwhelmingly that productivity has remained the same or increased as teams worked remotely, which is really good news. And we hope that that will strip away those final pockets of resistance to allow more flexibility into job roles. But as we were discussing earlier, culture has a really big part to play, and there are obviously things that we need to guard against. Within Scotland, there are some particularly positive signs coming from Scottish Government around using the recovery period to embed positive change in working practices and building a well-being economy. The No One Left Behind delivery plan, published in November of 2020, explicitly says, our recovery will be an opportunity to do things differently and, crucially, to rebuild our economy with well-being and fair work at its heart. And for me, that is just music to my ears, and I'm sure to everybody's. And at the launch of the SNP's election manifesto in April, the First Minister committed to creating a £10 million fund to allow companies to pilot and explore the benefits of a 4-day working week, which is also hugely exciting. And we are very, very interested to see how that will go. And the manifesto goes on to say, we will use the learning from this to consider a more general shift to a 4-day working week as and when Scotland gains full control of employment rights. And this kind of positive commitment from the government to exploring different ways of working is certainly something other nations can look forward to and learn from. So while it's been an incredibly challenging time, and there have been some tragedies along the way for families, there have also been, from a working perspective, some positives that we don't want to let go of as we look to our future. I've got three speakers here today. Pleased to say they've agreed to share their experiences with us and the lessons that they will be taking forward and perhaps the lessons they'll be leaving behind. And I'm going to introduce them in the running order. So I'm going to introduce them. Graham Cameron, who's the Head of Human Resources for Dounreay Site Restoration Limited. Fascinated to hear from you, Graham. Then he's going to be followed by Mark Haslett, who's the Senior HR Consultant for ScottishPower. And finally, we're going to have Harvey Tilley, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Independent Living Fund Scotland. And we've asked them to share their thoughts with us to kick us off. And as we go, do please pop any questions into the question bit, the Q&A, and we'll answer them as we go along if we possibly can. So I'm going to turn to Graham first, but somebody's popped in a question, which is the report that I mentioned. So it is the No One Left Behind, a delivery plan, which was published in November last year. My guess is you can find it on the Scottish Government website, but I'll ask one of the team to have a look, and then we can drop that response back into the chat. So Graham, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And if I can turn to you, your thoughts on the changes and challenges of the future of work in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Jane, and hello everybody. So yes, it was a pleasure to be invited. I'd like to say that I was on the beach in the background, but it's about being hopeful and thinking of things to come. And it was a hot day from what I remember when I took this, and it's actually Tilley is Scotland, so you don't have to go far for the tropical beaches. So just speaking about our own experience here at Dounreay, and just give some background for those who are not familiar with us. We're based right on the far north coast of Scotland. Any further and you're into the Pentland Firth. And we have a workforce of about 1,200 people. About 30% of our workforce is made up of females employees, and we employ people across a wide range of activities, all involved in decommissioning the former research and development nuclear site in Caithness. Our travel to work area covers the whole of Caithness and North Sutherland, and we have a few long distance commuters as well, from all the way down to the south of England, in fact. So we're pretty covering the whole country. And over the last year during COVID, we've haven't stopped recruitment, but we've been recruiting people who've been working remotely throughout that whole period. So a number of key changes for us. To explain where we were just before COVID struck, we have been on quite an intensive journey looking at the whole issue of our gender balance within the company, driven by our focus on diversity and inclusion, and particularly gender balance about how do we ensure we're attracting and retaining our females within the workforce, and particularly around removing barriers to people to accessing employment from females in our local community, but also to give the access to opportunities and for development going forward. So we've been looking at revising and updating our flexible working policies, and moving to a permissive rather than a prescriptive approach to flexible working, introducing the concept that all jobs, no matter what the makeup of them, can accommodate some form of flexible working. And we even looked at other activities such as upskilling or grading our shared parental leave arrangements so that they mirror our maternity leave and pay arrangement of our male workforce in child caring arrangements. So COVID then struck. What's been the changes we've experienced? Well, one of the key things has been it has accelerated a digital transformation within our company. We were already on the road to a major digital transformation program, and we achieved what turned out to be, in a matter of weeks, what was actually programmed for 2 years. We now have over 70% of our workforce have the capability of working remotely, and it has really, we experienced a step change in attitudes towards what was capable of being done remotely. the concept of the paperless office was an anathema to our business, and we've really learned to embrace that wholeheartedly. I think the key thing there is it's shown that remote working is possible. And it's not only is it possible, but it actually can, as Jane mentioned before, it's increased productivity for many of our staff. They don't have the commute, and they've been using that in different ways. And I think it's that in itself has been one of the biggest changes for us as an organisation. I think what it's also brought with it has been a revolution in the way that we have communicated within the business. We've, in line with the digital transformation, introduced a number of new means of communicating. We introduced a company app system that allowed people to use their own personal mobile phones in a way that our normal security arrangements wouldn't permit. What that has done is it's connected our senior team directly with everybody in the workforce. We can now hold whole staff briefings and have 800-900 people in a single briefing, and hear exactly the same thing from the managing director as they go. It has changed the way that the managing director produces a weekly blog, a video vlog, and it has really revolutionized the degree of engagement that we've experienced as a company. It's changed our ways of working from the point of view of some of our business processes, like recruitment, for example, but it's also highlighted that there's some real hidden problems that within communities that people need to be aware of. For example, it's highlighted the increase in awareness of domestic abuse issues, particularly where people are living in difficult family circumstances, and that has really come to the fore for that, and made us realise that not everybody has experienced COVID and remote working in as positive a way as others have. The challenges then have really been about everybody coming to grips with a new way of working. Establishing new work routines and protocols has been a big challenge for us. Jane mentioned the productivity issues, but what we found is that some people feel, because they're online all the time, they feel really pressurized to always be available, and being able to balance the demands of home life, particularly when there was homeschooling, and the challenges there. And we also noticed exactly what Jane mentioned, that despite the fact that we've been having, both parents might be working with us and be at home, it's still our experience has been that predominantly women share the burden, whether it's a combination of the homeschooling activities, whether it's actually balancing that with work as well. So how have we been looking at those challenges? The key roles for us has been line management, and how do we get line managers to engage and support their staff and understand. And mental health has been a really key area for us. It's highlighted the degree of support that people need and the opportunities that we have there for actually reaching out to people. What we've found is we've had to adapt our approach, and the key things is about being able to allow people who really need to come to a physical workplace to have that opportunity. So although we've fully embraced working from home where we can, we still have to have operations on our site by the very nature of what we do. And we've been able to have a limited opportunity for people who really need it, whether it's for mental health purposes, whether it's because they don't have the physical space for working at home. They've been able to come to our site or via a new office hub that we've created as well. And I think that what we've really learned from all of this is that when you don't have all the answers, is ask your workforce, because they come up with lots of really good answers. So Jane, I can hand back to you.
Thank you. What a great way to finish. That is just extraordinary, Graham. Graham, we've also had a question from one of our attendees who's asked if you could share what's the company app you use.
So we set up our own, it's a net presenter system. It's a very straightforward system that our communications team have used. So we went for the most practical arrangement. I don't know any of the technical details, I'm afraid, other than the fact it's via net presenter. So I don't know whether that helps. I can always get some more information and pass it through the network if that would be of help to people.
Thanks very much, Graham. I'm sure people will come back to us and let us know if that's the case. So thank you very much indeed, Graham. And we're now turning to Mark to run through the same questions, the challenges and changes that you see ahead in terms of short, long and medium term priorities, your experience that your line managers have had, and your COVID keepers. So Mark, welcome. And if I can hand over to you.
Yes, I'll do what Graham did. I'll give you a bit of context on who ScottishPower are. Probably the key thing for us is that we are big in sustainability. We're the only UK energy company who generates 100% green energy. So that, prior to COVID hitting, that from a values perspective we'd done a fair bit of work on terms of what that means to ScottishPower. But when COVID struck, we've got a workforce of 6,000 employees spread across the UK. And we had to work hard to transition over 50% of those employees to home working. And that included areas which you would have never previously considered. Home working would be things like call centres and probably quite lower paid roles, if you like, as well. So very similar to what Graham was saying in terms of the opportunity there was, while we had a digitalized platform through Microsoft Teams, very few people were using it. So one of the biggest opportunities has been both employees and managers getting used to that flexible way of working. And I think that holds us in good stead going forward as well, especially when it comes to things like sustainability. We were able to convert people very quickly. I think it's probably in the first instance when it came to people's anxiety. Thinking back now, it seems so long ago, but shifting in quite a remarkable way. I think within 2 weeks, we had pretty much everybody converted to home working who needed to home work as well. Obviously, as an energy company, similar to what Graham was saying, we've got a proportion of our workforce that continue to be essential workers out in the field as well. And I guess the other part when it came to trust of the employee base was we were fortunate from a sector perspective that we didn't have to furlough any employees and we didn't have to make anyone redundant. But if I think back to when schools closed, the first thing from an HR point of view, you look at your existing policies. And probably the biggest thing we did with hindsight was to step back from existing policies and to recognise that we're in a pandemic situation. So we were able to offer flexibility without any impact on salary, which I think initially certainly took a degree of anxiety out of the workforce, that we weren't going to start implementing policies and complicating that as well. And I think that released some pressure from a line manager perspective as well in some respects early on in the pandemic. What we also did was we put out a fair few guidelines on, from a health and well-being perspective, how we expected people to work from home. And we did put out some strong messages that we don't expect you to be online all the time. And we also expect people to be able to potentially flex at different times of the day as well, knowing that people had childcare issues and not just childcare issues, elder care issues as well. So I can't guarantee every line manager took that on board and every employee took that on board too. However, those strong messages were put out as something that we could then provide ongoing advice through HR teams as well. Graham made another point about centralized communications. We were in a fortunate position that the Teams platform allowed for, flexibility and collaboration early doors, but we've invested more in Teams. So that point that Graham made about managers being able to access large populations of the workforce, that's also been something that we've had an awful lot of engagement with as well. And we built in sessions from about June onwards on parent coaching as well, which were really, really well attended. And with hindsight, I think some of the learnings that we took from those sessions helped us with the lockdown, the second big lockdown at the beginning of this year when it came to homeschooling. So some of the things we were talking about was, and we had some specialists on to talk about from a schooling perspective, is to start managing parents' expectations about what schooling was, and to reduce the anxiety that people had that they weren't doing enough, essentially. One of the biggest questions we had was on parents who are anxious about kids using screen time and screen time increasing. But our messaging on that front through specialists, not HR professionals like me, but through specialists was, listen, that's fine. You have to take the pressure off. The fact that you're even constraining it at some point, and maybe you're not allowing laptops and tablets in bedrooms and things too, that's enough for the time being. And I think when it comes to anxiety, most of our work around about parents was to reduce that level of anxiety, given what we knew about the environment they were trying to work in. I'm delighted that from those sessions, we had a request to set up a parents network, which we've now done, and the learnings and that employee voice. So Graham's point they left off on, that listening to your employees is the best way of working your way through difficult situations as well. One of the things that came back through the parents network and our occupational health team as well was, from a line manager point of view, the least helpful thing that they could be told was just do what you can, because that was leading them to max out what they could as well. So what we did was, instead of just going directly back to our line managers, say, listen, don't say that, is we started to arm employees with the skills and the confidence to have a conversation about priorities and what they could do, and was that enough, essentially. So you start breaking down and get into the nuts and bolts of what is doable within the constraints that you have as an individual. And I think everybody's learned throughout lockdowns and COVID especially, that individuals just have a vast array of different circumstances. Homeschooling is never the same for one parent or two parents if they're able to co-parent from home. It's your children are different, the different ages of school, even preschool and things as well. They all come with such a range. And I think that the biggest learning that we've had is just being able to be flexible and listen before we act and provide specific advice as well. Our occupational health team have been busier than ever, both from the physical concerns around catching COVID as well. So we've been able to do a lot when it comes to support for individuals. If you think back to people who were sharing their household with members who were shielding, that was a big thing that we were able to provide case by case comfort and reassurance to individuals who are maybe coming out to work and going back into the household, and how to keep safe from that perspective. And we've done more when it comes to mental health. We have a mental health steering group set up now, and we have more of an engagement with our employees and what they want to hear when it comes to mental health as well. The point that Graham mentioned about domestic abuse, yeah, we've been able to keep even during lockdowns, we kept our offices open for the people who needed a safe place to work as well. And we've tied that when it comes to mental health considerations as well too. So we've allowed that level of flexibility, and we've got quite a flexible desktop booking service, so you can safely book where you're going to be within you're within the office, and we've been able to convert everything to things being nice and spacious, and within the social distancing constraints as well. So the other things we've done as well from a travel point of view, we've updated our travel policy to reflect a net zero world. Post-pandemic and during pandemic as well, and that I think will start to reduce the amount of excess travel that people are doing internationally, and I think we'll think twice about what we're doing within the UK as well. We'll be shifting to rail as opposed to within the UK. No one's going to be flying at all. It's all going to be rail based. So the thought of nipping down to London and coming back up, potentially people will think twice, and these kind of calls and these kind of conferences I think will sustain in the future as well. The point that Graham made about the impact on females, we have piloted, and we will be putting in as a business as usual mechanism or program, maternity coaching for our potential population. That's quite a long one-to-one coaching offering. And then for all employees from Q3 this year who are going on that maternity journey, we'll be offering maternity coaching group sessions for people who are preparing for leave, who are on leave, and who are returning from leave. And we've seen through the pilot last year, we've seen, I mean, numbers not huge, less than 10, but of the population who were coached, 50% of that population have both applied for promoted roles and been successful in promoted roles as well. So we're seeing quite a bit of read across, especially when it comes to imposter syndrome and confidence of even just putting your hand up to apply for a promoted role, how you're going to cope with that, and preparing mindsets as opposed to just thinking, well, actually, it's not the right time for me. So from a female progression point of view, we hope then that we're going to be embedding people who are going to be successful in promoted roles, who also have the benefit of that kind of coaching, which leads across to mental resilience as well. And hopefully in the next few years ahead, that those lessons will be learned and we'll get more confident in that space as well. I'm just conscious of time and trying to answer all the questions and cover off our challenges and opportunities. I think in the short term, when it comes to preparing for a return to work, we are looking at our building access. When we've been working with some of the mental health specialists as well, we do want to be flexible because what we're hearing is people do want to reconnect when it's safe to do so. And I think that we'll be working in an agile way in some way, shape or form. Social distancing is both a benefit and a constraint. I think it's a benefit for us as it holds back the desire for people to return en masse, because I think that's a useful exercise to do in quite a staged way, so that we don't lose the benefits of remote working. But it also provides a constraint in terms of how many people we can let into the building at one time. So from an agile working point of view, we might have to insist on specific days to fit teams in, as opposed to allowing it to be that bit more flexible as well. But potentially that might come as an opportunity when social distancing does reduce as well. Sustainability will continue to be a long-term focus, and our workspaces will be modified to be net zero compliant. So we will be limiting the amount of people who will be able to get into our organisation full stop, which I think will allow us to continue on with the remote working side of things, and will increase that level of collaboration as well too. The experience, I think I probably covered off when it comes to working with line managers. It is having that open dialogue, using our employee networks. It's not just the parent carers network we have. We've got a multi-ethnic network now. We've got a network on LGBT+, Connected Women's Network too, and some of the work that we will be doing on policy this year. I am extremely confident we'll be extending our maternity provisions quite considerably in terms of paid leave. We'll also be extending our paternity provisions, which might take a little bit of pressure off our shared parental leave provisions, which at the moment mirror our maternity provisions. But we're also looking at other policies. We're looking with our Connected Women's Network at menopause, as well. And we'll also be looking at what we're going to do around about our bereavement policies as well, because that's one of our biggest lessons. Well, I would say lessons, one of the biggest feedback areas is there are so many people who have been bereaved in one way, shape or form throughout the pandemic too, and how we support those individuals longer term from a mental health point of view, again, is something that we'll be co-creating with our parent and carers network too. So the last thing I would say is one of the speakers on our parent coaching sessions, who was an expert in working with autistic children, came out with a quote that the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. And I think that's a very profound comment when it comes to how employers engage with their employees. When we end up in a trusted relationship, flexibility and adoption of what flexible working policies we have and ways of working, then those tend to move quite quickly and they get used in the right way. Whereas when trust is absent from either the employee or the line manager or the employer, then that's when we have our most challenging conversations. So I think I'll leave it there.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. For me, there were a couple of takeaways there straight off the bat. And my team is going to have to tell me if the words "do what you can" ever leaves my lips again. That clearly is a no-no. It's a really good lesson, actually.
So one thing that I missed, I just looking at the chat site there, and on the maternity coaching, what is unique for us is that we don't just coach the employees, we coach the line managers as well. So that conversation with their person who's on leave or returning is a much more productive conversation as opposed to just being paternalistic, which is where we've been up to now. Sorry, I cut across you. I wanted to get that one out.
Absolutely fine. It's absolutely fascinating what you're doing. Really extremely interesting. And it's so energizing to hear of all of these extraordinary things that employers are doing across the country, and particularly in Scotland. So thank you, Mark. Mark, we've got one small practical question. Flexible desktop booking service. Do you use anything specific?
We have an online site that you go into. I think it's, I could be wrong here. I think it's Citric. I'm like Graham. I don't know the ins and outs, the technical side of things, but I will find that out for you, and I'll see if I can do that even during the session.
Lovely. Thanks very much indeed, Mark. And now I'm delighted to welcome Harvey Tilley, who's a huge fan and proponent of flexible working. So Harvey, over to you.
So, I mean, I was listening to the two previous speakers. I'm going to say that we've done a lot what they've done. So, and I could finish there and let go to questions. But I suppose for us, we're the smallest of the organisations that are on the panel today. We've got about 60 staff. We support disabled people to live independently across Scotland and Northern Ireland. We do that through providing direct funding. So we provide funding through two schemes. One is a 4-weekly scheme for what we call the 2015 fund, and that's to enable folk to live independently, to purchase supports and carers, etc. And then we also run another scheme, which is a broad-based grant scheme, 12-month sort of turnaround for young disabled folk to reconnect or become community citizens. And I think before we went into COVID, I think it's worth saying that we were already, I would like to think, pretty forward-thinking. The majority of our staff, or all of our staff, work flexibly in one way, shape, or form. Interestingly, we work across, like I say, Scotland, Northern Ireland. We have home-based staff for around about 2/3, which is our assessors, which are predominantly social workers, occupational therapists, to go into disabled people's homes and co-design their support packages. And then we have an office-based staff and some senior staff that sort of a sort of hybrid work between sort of the office and wherever they are doing meetings. I think, like all the organisations, there was sort of the pandemic came up on us really quick, and we sort of were seeing the news and thinking, oh well, nothing's going to really happen. Okay, well, we might have some few restrictions. Then all of a sudden, everything's closed down overnight. I think the fact that we were already well down our sort of flexible work journey was helpful. We already had, say, 100% of staff working flexibly. We had really, I think, progressively positive policies and support already in place. So for us, the flip to what I say home working, and I'm going to like other panelists, we weren't, we didn't go into home working because of a number of factors that have presented some of the challenges, but we could flip overnight and with no real drop in service, albeit that we had to stop going to people's homes overnight, and that meant we had to reorient ourselves to how do we connect with disabled people to support them to carry on living independently, and that was a real challenge as their support around them dropped, and completely disappeared overnight. So I think it would be fair to say that disabled people were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and the inequalities that are already in place were sort of, there's a term up is turbocharged, where all the inequalities that disabled people felt beforehand. So that initial phase was technology, getting the technology lined up, getting used to virtual technology, and like Mark said, we went from having very few members of staff using Skype and all of those sort of things to everyone using Teams and Zoom and whatever the medium is. Now it just becomes, it's part of our sort of day-to-day work. I think very early on we realised that mental health was going to play a real key role in ourselves, and we commissioned somebody called Strong Mind Resilience. They do work for the Home Office, prison service, charities, the military, and a myriad of other things around. We initially thought it'd be bereavement was going to be the issue of disabled folk. The folk that we support predominantly have got underlying health conditions and are those at the more significant disablement end of the spectrum. And we were worried that there will be higher rates of casualties and staff would be speaking to staff. So we looked at sort of a resilience and a sort of a mental health resilience and preparing people for that. As we went through, we didn't see those numbers of people, both internally or externally, suffering from COVID. What we did see, though, is we saw isolation becoming an even key theme for both staff and for those that we were working with. And so we've done a number of online webinars and interactions around mental health resilience throughout the year. And we've refreshed that about 4 times through the year at different phases. I think one of the other things we realised is we went from being, I would say, a busy, stretched organisation like most, to being super, super, super busy overnight. And we probably tripled our workload over the last 12 months. But it's not been a sort of peaks and troughs, it's been constant. And that, of course, has led to another challenge of burnout. And I was sort of reflecting on this probably around about June time, when colleagues were saying this throughout. We do all the things that other people have done. We've got extra communication channels. We did weekly communications, emails. We met staff online monthly, and all of these things, Trickle, Yammer. We used all of these things, and also probably there was a challenge of being almost an overload of communications coming to people. But what we really found was that individuals were really tired. They got tired really quickly because they were on virtual technology all the time, and they were working, even if we were being quite disciplined with our working hours. And I introduced something that we used to do in the army, is when you're doing high tempo operations, is you pull colleagues out of the line. So you take a few out and the other people cover them, and you take them out of the line for a few days. They sort of have a chance to sort of rest and recuperate, and then they come back fully charged back into the line. And you can elongate the sort of high tempo of operations for a much longer period of time. So I introduced something called COVID long weekends, where over and above annual leave, so people got a long weekend that we mandated every month. So over and above leave. I've got to say that this was other public bodies found that very hard to square away, because how can you be really busy and take people out and expect to cover your workload? It's a real sort of contradiction in terms. But what we did find is sickness rates remained very low, stress remained very low, and we were able to deliver even more. So actually it was the complete opposite, but it was a contradiction in terms. And we did that initially for 3 months in a row. Then we stopped doing it when we sort of went into sort of quieter period, relatively speaking. And then we had a few more weekends in February and March this year, when again, colleagues were really struggling with that sort of burnout. So that was one of the challenges. The other challenge that we've really suffered was, interestingly, was our office-based staff have been going into the office, or our sort of probably on a skeleton format throughout the whole period. So they were relatively unaffected. And if anything, they've got greater flexibility. They've got phones, they've got technology now. They can work wherever they want. The staff that have really struggled for us are our home-based staff, who are our assessors, who are, by the very nature of this, the sort of characteristics, are very sociable. And they're not going to people's homes, they're not going to disabled people's homes, and they found it a miserable time. And so we've had to do a lot more work around the health and wellbeing groups, bringing people together. And it's them that are now pushing to get back into the office as quickly as possible and reconnect and go out to people's homes. So I suppose we've done a lot of the things alongside that for the health and wellbeing. We've done things like ditch the desk, which is, get up and do a meeting, walk away from the desk, and it's a metaphorical desk because we have some disabled colleagues. So it's ditching where you're working and going, having a new experience somewhere else. We've done wellbeing half an hour every week. We've got the COVID long weekends. We've got a whole raft of other mental health support. And I think with that, that's helped us in terms of our sort of short-term, mid-term priorities, which is our short-term is to, I suppose, get back to some sort of physicality in both the office using it as sort of reconnection. Staff are nervous about driving, they're nervous about being around each other, those who haven't been in the office. And they're also nervous of meeting loads of people. And that also applies to going to disabled people's homes who have literally shut themselves away from everyone. So we've got to also persuade them that we'll have all the protections, we'll have lateral flow tests, we'll have PPE, have all been fully vaccinated. And that's another issue around the legalities of everyone being fully vaccinated for perhaps another day. I suppose the last thing I would say is with that is bandwidth. When we initially went into this, technology was great, but the internet just couldn't handle everyone being online at the same time. And so that was a problem initially. And we sort of just had to sit on our hands and wait for it, sort of the technology and the bandwidth to catch up with us. But now we're all sort of used to it. So I suppose going forward, it's a hybrid model. We're going to use the office in a slightly different way. We're not going to expect 9 to 5. We'll use it to connect with each other physically. We'll use other locations. We'll meet for coffees, teas. We already trust our staff 100% to work where they want and how they want. So that isn't an issue. It's really about facilitating that safe space for people to connect with each other. And I think really, I've got loads written down of challenges and all that stuff, but again, time is of the essence. So I'm going to sit back and answer any questions if anyone's got. But thank you very much for letting me speak today.
Thanks very much, Harvey. I've just been absolutely fascinated by what everybody's had to say. All such different, as I mentioned at the start, this is not a phrase I came up with. We have all been in the same storm, but we've absolutely not been in the same boat. And it's been so interesting listening to you and the different ways in which your businesses and your staff have adapted to what's been going on with them. And certainly, people who like people around them have also had a particularly challenging time during COVID, during this global pandemic. So I'm going to start with a question to you each. What are your COVID keepers? What is the one thing that you will keep as a result of the experience that we've all had? And I'm going to go round the houses again. So Graham.
I think the key one really was to reinforce the point that I made at the beginning, which was it's actually all right for a management team not to have all the answers, and but what's important is that they provide as many opportunities for feedback and get and understand where their staff are, and that's really very important. And I think, echoing a point, I think it was Mark that made about the we made the same mistake of the senior manager saying just do what you can, and I think that the giving that the intent was well meant, but the impact on some people was that they felt that they really almost couldn't leave the electronic desk. And I think that really is key. And I think we've taken that forward in terms of thinking about, where we go from here as a company. And so, we've just launched what we're calling our Reimagine the Future of Work exercise, which is about really engaging with our workforce directly through surveys, focus groups, etc., to ensure that when we talk about what the future is, that it actually reflects what people would like to see, and how we manage to balance the business need with the individual needs as well.
Oh, Graham, we've lost you. Thanks, Graham.
I'm sorry about that.
I think we just lost the last couple of words. I've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. So Mark, having teed you up to tell me what you were going to do about your COVID keeps, you can do that. But we have also had a question around, are you able to share any approaches, any changes in approach to remuneration that you've introduced to support home or remote working?
Is that to me specifically?
I think it's to everybody, but if you are able to share it, people are interested in the answer.
So we have not put in any specific allowances. We have, we're keen that people's workplaces are as accommodating as possible, as in a home working environment. So we've got a DSE assessment, and if you have got issues, then by exception, we will then provide additional chairs and things as well, but that is signed off through our occupational health team. We have provided everybody with a remote mouse and a remote keyboard and laptop riser, but everybody has a laptop as well, and that's the idea, is that people are then allowed to move around their space that bit easier and things too. Plus, when it comes to agile working or hybrid working, it's easier to get in and out the office with the tools you use. So no, we've not provided any specific allowances, and we did a lot of benchmarking early doors and have continued to do that throughout the pandemic as well. And I'm not hearing many other people who are looking at specific allowances, because twofold, there's what we don't want to do is create a situation where people feel so tied to the home that it's hard to get them back in. And secondly, the way that most of our workforce has reacted to home working, most of them, is that it has allowed them benefits that they didn't necessarily maybe realize beforehand. So a reduction in cost when it comes to travel, balances out heating and broadband and things too. So that's where we are.
I think our position is very similar to what Mark said, is we've not introduced any allowances for exactly the same reasons that we have. We had nobody furloughed, and we've not made any adjustments for recognising that there could have been reductions in productivity. So there's been no change to our reward policies as a result of the pandemic itself.
And my executive say we've had no change. So what I would say is the thing we did is we didn't need a DSE assessment for chairs and desks. We just told staff to go and buy them if they needed them. We also initially bought them phones because the office-based staff didn't have, some of them didn't have phones. So we went and bought some pay-as-you-go phones. Then we issued them the sort of integrated devices, so they've got phones. So a bit like Mark, our staff can post-pandemic can work anywhere they want to and be sort of essentially networked into our systems. But we did provide our office kit for their house, and probably most staff have taken that up now, and right from the top to the bottom.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Harvey. So the next question from the audience is, how do you ensure a consistent approach across your organisation in terms of supporting all of your staff with the opportunity to have access to flexible working, regardless of the nature of their roles? are there any barriers that you are seeing in terms of establishing your new protocols around new ways of working or around engaging your line managers in this process? So in summary, one, how are you getting consistent approach for flexible working, irrespective of role? And two, are you seeing any barriers? Anyone want to go first?
I'll very quickly go, because we were already pretty flexible before work. So for us, there's been really no change. What we have seen, though, probably those office-based staff who were predominantly more office focused are more flexible. And so there's the barriers that we've seen really now are getting people to reconnect. That's our barriers is connection. So we haven't got. Remember, we're a small workforce. We've got a central office in Livingston. We work across. Majority of our staff already home based. So for us, it's pretty not the same as Mark and Graham's sort of operations.
We've adopted. We've never really come out of disaster recovery in a kind of structured way. So a lot of work and Q&As from a central point that people can access, but also working with each of the business disaster recovery teams in terms of this is the policy that we will adopt and this is what we want you to do. We also put in a lot of work last year to communicate to our line manager population with packs and slides that we took them through. And then it's about briefing from the HR case management team that consistent advice when issues do pop up. Incidentally, our biggest issue that popped up throughout the whole remote working situation that required most work was actually individuals who had elected to work from a different country who were UK based, because we've got some global sites and things as well. We needed to bring them back home, and we found out that we had many more than we thought initially. So that was one of the things that was one of the biggest challenges in terms of consistent application, and that would have cost us a tremendous amount from a tax point of view had we not been able to address it. But we use that mechanism to do so.
And our approach has been very much, I suppose, broadly similar to that. We set out some principles right at the beginning that we would apply to the way that people should be working, recognizing that some roles had to be were limited by the physical nature of what they were doing, so they were very operationally based. And one of the things we were very conscious about was the potential for a divide in the company between those people who had to continue to attend the site throughout the pandemic and deal with the concerns that they may have about their safety if they were requiring to attend the site, as against those who were working remotely throughout the arrangement. And that's is continuing to. That's one of the biggest concerns we've got, is that when we move into reimagining the future, that we don't recreate silos within the workforce because of that. But on the whole, the obvious safety valves around inconsistency has obviously been through consultation with our trade unions, and ensuring that we're able to get feedback from them and use that as an opportunity of identifying at an early stage where there might be individual issues, and then just resolving them as they arise.
Thank you, Graham. I find it interesting that you're all talking about this phrase co-creation, which is something that we know about in the charity world through that our funders keep on talking to us about co-creating our services with our service users. And I find it really interesting that it's now being used as a word to describe the interrelationship between staff teams and employers, which can really be a good thing.
I think from our perspective, it cuts down on work because we tend to get to the issues quicker and more succinctly, as opposed to trying to create the scenarios ourselves.
So there's also, for us, disabled people have often, they talk about, solutions about being about them, with them, not forced upon them, and controlled choice is give people control and choice, they'll come up with the a solution much more quickly. So we use jargon co-production. I mean, I kind of cringe whenever I hear any jargonistic work, but working co-designing plans or code reviews, you get a much more sustainable solution that actually tends to be relatively cheaper, and people know that solutions for themselves. It's been proven when we talk about service users and all that. It's been proven for the last 50 years that communities find their own solutions much more quickly, and so for us, it's just an extension of our culture we treat disabled people or our recipients the same as we treat our staff, and not vice versa.
Yeah.
I think just to add to that as well, I mean, one of the key elements of this that we've seen as a business shift is that we're looking at really trying to drive the culture to one away from the presenteeism to output focused, and the outcomes that people are creating from their jobs. And that if there's a line manager challenge, that's the biggest challenge, is making that shift of management focus away from the inputs and managing the inputs to actually having a clear focus on outcomes. And I think that's fundamental, not just to the business, but how going forward, making agile or flexible working work in the long term to everybody's benefit.
And I think just some the point that the question you started off with there, Jane, was what's your COVID keepers? On a principle basis, I mean, obviously we've talked about technology and these things are here to stay, but on a principle basis, the mass, it's not even an experiment, but it's the mass insight that everybody's circumstances are very different. Even when you look at the screen, you see a different picture behind me to Harvey, to yourself, to Graham. And I think that, because I would agree with Graham, the presenteeism aspect, the application of policy as well is a major challenge from a line manager point of view, especially a large organization where you end up with a view that it's actually fairer to treat everybody the same. And I hope that our keeper will be, for a principle, it's neither beneficial or logical to treat everybody the same. You have to look at their personal circumstances, but that will be work in progress. I just hope we stick with that principle. That'll be our keeper.
And for me, that is the perfect way to end this session of the future of work in Scotland. We've overrun, I'm afraid, by 2 minutes, and I'm sorry that's my chairing, because I couldn't stop any of you because I was so interested in what you were saying. But what a way to finish, that in Scotland, hopefully there's going to be much more understanding about people's individual circumstances and looking at finding solutions together that suit individuals, because we are all so different. Thank you all so much. This has been absolutely fascinating. I've loved it. I hope it's been really useful for you. And I really hope the audience have had a very good time. So thank you very much indeed. And I'm going to bring this now to a close. Thank you, everybody. Hope you have a good day. Thanks. Bye.